You never expect your life to split into a before and after on an ordinary Tuesday morning. But if I'm honest, there had always been a quiet crack running through my days. A thin fissure of curiosity that made me question the things most people accepted without a second thought. Still, I never imagined the first real evidence would arrive wrapped in brown paper, unmarked except for 3 words scribbled in precise black ink. Don't trust reality. Welcome to MysteryCon. Before we dive deeper, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay tuned. I had been at the Bellamy Institute for almost a decade, moving from postdoc to lecturer to senior researcher. My work, computational philosophy, was the sort of discipline most people politely pretended to understand. In simple terms, I built models of cognition and tested whether consciousness could emerge from code alone. To my colleagues, I was brilliant, but perhaps a little reclusive. I liked to think of myself as cautious. After all, the boundary between a rigorous idea and a delusion is thinner than we care to admit. That morning, rain lashed against the tall windows of my office. The sky was a smear of pewter and white, and the courtyard below had flooded in shallow pools that mirrored the trees. I'd been up since 4, unable to sleep, revising a manuscript about semantic emergence in recursive neural systems. That was what passed for excitement in my life. Footnotes, peer reviews, the occasional conference in some over-conditioned hotel. When the doorbell rang downstairs, I ignored it. No one came to see me without emailing first. A moment later, a notification popped up on my phone, a delivery requiring signature. I remember the unease before I even opened the door. The courier didn't look me in the eye. He thrust the parcel into my hands and mumbled something about the weather. His van idled at the curb, with its hazard lights blinking in the downpour. When I closed the door, I stood there for a while, turning the package over in my hands. No sender's name, no postage label, just those words, "Don't trust." Reality, it was absurd, but my heart was hammering all the same. I carried it upstairs to my study. The house was too big for one person, an old Georgian townhouse I'd inherited from my mother. Every room filled with the smell of old books and the constant hush of the rain. I set the parcel on my desk, next to my half-finished cup of coffee. Even then, part of me hoped it would be a hoax, some elaborate prank by a bored graduate student. I peeled back the tape and lifted the flaps. Inside was a single USB drive, black plastic worn at the edges. Beneath it lay a folded sheet of cream stationery. I unfolded it with deliberate care, afraid I might tear it. The note was typed, not handwritten. "Mira, if you're reading this, I've failed. You know me as Axel. You were right all along. Our assumptions were too small, too cautious. Project Origin is real, and it's older than we thought. If you value your life and your mind, proceed carefully. The encryption key is your father's date of death, AR." I read it twice before the name sank in, Axel Reinhardt. We hadn't spoken in nearly 4 years. We'd argued over funding, over the boundaries of our research, over what counted as science and what didn't. He'd always chased the edges of reality with a reckless hunger I could never share. And yet, the moment I saw his initials, something shifted in me, like a door creaking open in a part of my mind I'd kept locked. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. This was the same Axel who'd disappeared 6 months ago. Some said he'd burned out. Others whispered about a breakdown. There were rumors he'd uncovered something that made him dangerous to his sponsors. I'd never believed it, until now. For a long moment, I just sat there, listening to the storm beating against the glass. Then I stood and walked to the bookshelf behind my desk. My fingers hovered over a row of faded volumes until I found the one I needed. A family ledger my father kept. I flipped to the back, where his death certificate had been tucked away all these years. November 12th, 1991. I wrote the date on a scrap of paper and set it beside the USB. I should have called someone. The Institute had protocols for this sort of thing: suspected data breaches, potential security risks. But the truth was, I didn't trust them, not with this. Not when it came to Axel. So I plugged the USB into my workstation. The screen flickered once and then displayed a single file directory, project_origin. I double-clicked. A password prompt appeared. My hands trembled as I typed in the date, each keystroke echoing louder than it should have. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the folder opened. Inside were dozens of files, each labeled in the same austere format: fragment_001 through fragment_032. I clicked the first. A text document loaded, densely packed with figures and references. It took a moment before I realized what I was seeing: a mathematical constant, an impossibly precise value, far more decimal places than any human had ever derived. It was annotated in Axel's clipped, methodical style, extracted checksum from cosmic microwave background data, standard noise filters removed. Probability of artifact 1 inch YPAC. This is a signature, a non-natural fingerprint. I swallowed, feeling a cold weight settle in my chest. I'd worked with cosmic microwave background readings before, used them to test statistical models of entropy. The idea that such a clean constant could be embedded in the background radiation was absurd. But here it was, staring back at me. Opened the next file, and the next. Each contained a piece of something larger: mathematical patterns, encryption keys, references to experiments I'd never heard of. But it was fragment_008 that made me lean back in my chair, heart thundering. It was a video clip, grainy and badly compressed. I clicked play. AKSEL appeared on the screen. He was older, gaunt, with hollow eyes and a beard that had grown in patches. He looked straight into the camera. Myra, if you're seeing this, they know I talk to you. The constant isn't the end. It's a header checksum proving the rest of the data came from the same source. What you're looking at isn't random noise, it's construction code. The CMB isn't a natural phenomenon, it's the initialization vector. It defines the universe's state parameters. His voice broke on the last word. For a moment, he just sat there, breathing raggedly. Then he leaned closer. I know you never believed in my theories, but you have to believe this. If you don't, they'll erase you like they erased me. The video ended in a burst of digital static. I sat motionless for a long time. The rain had stopped. The only sound was the low hum of the server array beside my desk. I thought about calling the Institute's director, Dr. Goring. He'd told me once that Axel was unstable, that he'd lost perspective. But the data didn't look like the ravings of a madman. It looked deliberate, meticulous, and the implications were almost too big to hold in my mind. If he was right, if the cosmic microwave background wasn't a remnant of the Big Bang, but a synthetic initialization sequence, then everything we took for granted was suspect. Physical laws, memory, even the feeling of sitting there in my chair, wondering whether my life had just been ruined by a ghost. I closed the video and returned to the folder. A final document had been added to the directory while the clip was playing. Timestamp showed it had appeared only moments ago. My skin prickled as I realized the USB was still active, running some script in the background. I opened the file. It was a set of GPS coordinates, latitude and longitude, and a single line beneath, Reinhardt last transmission. Kalama Outpost, Siberia. I exhaled slowly, the room around me expanding and contracting with each breath. Axel had gone farther than anyone had known, farther than I had ever dared. And whatever he'd found out there, it was important enough that someone wanted it buried. I unplugged the USB and slipped it into my pocket. My mind was already moving ahead, mapping out the next steps, what I'd need to travel, who I could trust, what precautions I had to take. But beneath the planning was something else, a tight coil of fear that no amount of logic could suppress. Because in that moment, the world I thought I knew, the safe, predictable universe governed by reason, began to feel like an elaborate fiction, and as much as I wanted to deny it, a single thought kept echoing in my mind. If the universe was fabricated, what did that make me? I stood at the window and watched the last shreds of storm drift east across the city for the first time. In years, I felt truly awake. Not because I'd found an answer, but because I'd finally learned the right question to ask, and I knew, without any doubt, that I wouldn't stop until I found out who had built this reality and why. I thought I'd prepared myself for anything. But as the little twin-engine plane rattled through the grey Siberian dawn, a part of me still wanted to turn back. The coordinates Axel had left were etched into my mind like a bruise I couldn't stop pressing. Kalima Outpost was supposed to be decommissioned decades ago, a relic of some old Soviet project that no one talked about anymore. But I knew better now. Some secrets didn't vanish. They just waited for the right person to come looking. The pilot didn't speak much English, and I didn't speak any Russian. We communicated in nods and gestures. Every so often, he would glance at me in the rearview mirror as if wondering why anyone would fly into this nowhere place willingly. I couldn't blame him. The world below was nothing but frozen forest and patches of bare earth where permafrost had cracked open like old skin. When we landed on a short strip cut into the ice, he pointed to a building a few hundred meters away, low and made of corrugated metal sheets bleached by decades of wind and cold. I climbed out and pulled my coat tight around my neck. My boots crunched over the frostbitten ground, each step loud in the vast silence. The plane's engines died behind me, leaving only the steady sound of my own breathing. I didn't look back when he took off again. I knew if I did, I might run after him. The door to the main structure hung crooked on rusted hinges. Inside, the air smelled like old diesel and mold. My flashlight beam swept over cracked linoleum, upturned chairs, and the husks of outdated computers. I tried not to think about the fact that Axel had been here alone, combing through this decay. There was no heat. My breath fogged in front of me as I moved deeper into the building. Most of the rooms were empty, just remnants of a time when this place had mattered to someone. But when I reached the back, I found a lab that had been sealed off behind a reinforced door. A keypad glowed faintly beside it. I tried the code Axel and I used to share when we collaborated our first joint publication date. The lock clicked open. The room was better preserved than I expected. Shelves lined with labeled boxes. A cluster of equipment, oscilloscopes, photon detectors, cables wound neatly in loops. A generator somewhere in the walls still fed a trickle of power to a few blinking lights. I found Axel's journal on a metal desk. The cover was cracked, corners softened from use. My hands were shaking as I opened it. His handwriting was small and precise, but in some places the letters slanted, as if he'd been writing too fast to keep them neat. April 19th. Decoherence, anomaly repeated 17 times. Same pattern. Photon stream resolves to binary. Sequence 01001000. I didn't need to look it up. The number burned into my mind H. The first letter of something, maybe someone. A code that started with a single letter and waited for someone to finish it. May 3rd, sponsorship meeting. They want results. I showed them the interference patterns. They didn't seem surprised. That frightened me more than if they'd denied it. I turned the page. May 12th. Myra would say I've crossed the line, but I had to see. The photons are not behaving like random particles. They're being instructed. Someone is adjusting the parameters while we watch. I felt cold down to my bones. I could picture Axel standing here in the glow of the monitors, exhausted, half-starved, driven by an obsession. I was starting to feel myself. On the desk, next to the journal, was an old hard drive. I plugged it into my laptop, unsure if it would even power up, but the screen flickered to life, displaying a list of video logs. I clicked the most recent one. Axel appeared in the dim light of this same lab. His face was hollow, skin tight over his cheekbones. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. If you find this, Myra, you need to understand I didn't choose this. They were always going to find someone to finish the work. But the code anomalies aren't the worst of it. They showed me something. A master schema of the simulation's maintenance routines. I saw commands halt loop, adjust tick rate. I think they can rewrite the simulation in real time. His voice cracked. He looked over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to be there. They said if I tried to copy the data, I'd disappear, just like the others. But I had to. If you can hear this, it means I failed to hide. The video ended abruptly. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I felt that same tight coil in my chest, the same dread I'd carried since the first file opened back in London. Only now it was sharper. If the custodians could adjust time itself, if they could erase people from memory as easily as deleting a file, then none of us was safe. And if Axel was gone, it wasn't because he walked away. I copied everything. The journal scans, the video logs, the experimental data. While the files transferred, I moved around the lab, searching for anything he might have left behind. In a locked cabinet, I found a battered cardboard box filled with printouts. Graphs of interference patterns, each with handwritten notes along the margins. One corner was folded over, and when I smoothed it out, I saw a sequence of dates and locations, places where Axel had recorded anomalies. London, Geneva, Denver, Tokyo. One line had been circled in red ink. Geneva Archives Facility. I felt the floor tilt under me. If he'd planned to travel there, it meant he'd been trying to trace the anomalies back to their source. Geneva was where the custodians stored historical records. If anything survived, it would be there. A beep from my laptop pulled me back. The transfer was complete. I ejected the drive and slipped it into my bag. Then I shut down the generator, plunging the lab into silence. I was halfway to the exit when I saw a small red light flicker on near the ceiling. At first, I thought it was a smoke detector, but as I watched, the light pulsed twice, paused, then pulsed again, a signal pattern. My stomach dropped. Someone was watching. I backed away slowly, trying not to make noise. My eyes darted over the walls, searching for other cameras I'd missed. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. When I reached the doorway, I glanced back one last time. That red light was still blinking, steady and unhurried, like it had been waiting for me to notice. Outside, the wind had picked up, blowing snow across the empty runway. My boots slipped on the ice as I ran for the Radio Shack. There was an old transceiver there, likely rigged to a satellite relay. I hesitated. Calling anyone meant risking interception. But if I disappeared here, no one would ever know what I'd found. I flipped the switch. Static hissed from the speaker. I keyed the mic and forced my voice steady. This is Myra Thornton, Kalama Outpost, broadcasting encrypted signal. If anyone receives this, I have confirmation of Project Origin. No answer. I repeated the message, then turned the transceiver off. If I was going to get out alive, I had to move fast. Back at the runway, a fresh set of tire tracks curved through the frost. My chest tightened. No plane, no sign of the pilot. The wind had started to erase the prints, but I could still see them snaking toward the tree line. I tried not to panic. Maybe he'd just gone for fuel. Maybe, but deep down, I knew better. I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked the last GPS coordinate Neva, my only chance to stay ahead of whoever was tracking me, whoever had turned on that camera. As I walked back into the building to gather my things, my mind spun in tight circles. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, holding proof that reality wasn't what it seemed. And there were people willing to kill to keep that secret buried. But as I zipped my bag and glanced once more at Axel's journal, I felt something shift inside me. A slow, rising conviction that the safest thing I could do was the last thing they expected. Keep going, even if it cost me everything. It took almost 3 days to get out of Siberia. My phone had lost its signal by the time I reached the small mining settlement to the south. I had to pay a driver with the last of my cash to take me to the nearest town with a working internet connection. All the while, I kept expecting to see headlights in the rearview mirror, or feel a hand clamp down on my shoulder. But no one came. Maybe they were letting me run because they knew I wouldn't get far. I didn't sleep much those nights. I kept the hard drive tucked against my body under my clothes. At first, I told myself it was just about safety, that it was too valuable to risk in my bag. But if I was honest, it felt like an anchor, a reminder that everything I'd believed could be undone by a few lines of code. When I finally boarded the flight back to London, the overhead bins were nearly empty. I watched the sun come up over the runway and wondered if it might be the last time I saw it as something real. The thought made my throat close. Back at my flat, I didn't even bother unpacking. I locked every door, pulled the blackout curtains, and powered up the workstation. The files I'd copied from Axel's lab were Amaze video logs, raw data dumps, cryptic text files. Some were corrupted beyond recovery, but the ones that opened all pointed to the same conclusion. The interference patterns weren't natural. A KSEL had been tracking a shadow organization he called the Custodians. At first, I thought it was just a label he'd come up with to make sense of his paranoia. But the more I read, the less certain I became that it was paranoia at all. He'd left behind a partial ledger financial transactions, linked to shell companies that funneled money into quantum research labs across 5 continents. The same labs that had reported strange anomalies in entanglement experiments, only to retract their papers days later. I traced one payment chain to a corporation registered in Luxembourg, It was buried under layers of holding companies and blind trusts. But when I followed the registration trail, a name surfaced that made my heart pound. Bernard Voss, a venture capitalist who had once tried to buy the Bellamy Institute outright. A man who had insisted he was interested only in supporting innovation. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For a long moment, I let the weight of it settle on me. The custodians weren't just a fringe cabal. They were embedded in the institutions that shaped science itself. They didn't need to hide, because they were already inside the walls. My phone vibrated on the desk, a soft buzz that snapped me back to the present. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. The message was from an unknown number. You're in over your head. They're watching. No signature. No further explanation. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Whoever sent that text knew what I'd found, and they were close enough to see me working in real time. I powered everything down and disconnected the hard drives. My mind was moving too fast, skipping between fear and a cold determination that surprised me. If the custodians were willing to kill to keep this buried, it meant what I had was real. It meant Axel hadn't died for nothing. I tried to sleep, but my dreams were jagged, strange loops of time, the feeling of being watched by something I couldn't name. I woke with a start around 4 a.m., my chest tight, convinced I'd heard footsteps in the hall. But when I crept to the peephole, the corridor was empty. By dawn, I knew I couldn't stay in my flat. I packed a single rucksack, enough to get by for a few days. Then I did something that felt like stepping off a ledge. I called Leo Chen. Leo was an investigative journalist I'd met years ago when he was writing a profile on experimental consciousness research. Back then, I'd thought he was reckless chasing stories that got people hurt. But he had sources I didn't, and I couldn't do this alone anymore. When he answered, his voice was groggy. I could hear a baby crying in the background. Myra. Christ, it's early. I need to see you, I said. It's important. There was a pause. Then he cleared his throat. Tell me where. I gave him the address of a cafe near Victoria Station, a place with no cameras on the street, and a back exit that led into an alley. He didn't ask questions, just promised he'd be there in an hour. I left my building by the fire stairs, keeping my hood up and my face turned away from any security lenses. The city was waking up, delivery trucks rattling over potholes, commuters shuffling along with their headphones in. All of it looked the same as it always did, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the streets were a set. The people extras in a script I hadn't written. At the cafe, I took a seat at the far corner, my back to the wall. I kept one hand in my bag, resting on the edge of the hard drive. When Leo arrived, he looked older than I remembered. A little heavier around the shoulders, more tired around the eyes. He slid into the chair opposite me without a word. I didn't bother with small talk. I handed him a printout, one of Axel's ledgers linking the shell companies to Voss. They're real, I said. The custodians. They're funding quantum labs to manipulate the simulation, and they killed Axel. He studied the paper in silence. You know how this sounds, he said finally. Yes, but it doesn't matter anymore. I have proof. I pulled out a thumb drive with some of the decrypted logs and set it between us. If I disappear, you publish everything, I said. His gaze lifted to mine, and for the first time, I saw something that looked like fear. You're serious? Yes. He picked up the drive and slipped it into his coat pocket. What's your plan? I hesitated. My plan had felt clear in the quiet of my flat. Here, in the brightness of morning, it seemed fragile. I need to trace the next node. Geneva, there's an archive there. If I can get the raw patch metadata, we'll know what they've changed. And you're going alone. I don't have a choice. Leo shook his head. You're not the only one who's been chasing this, he said. I've been hearing rumors about a protocol, something called the Reset Doctrine. I frowned. What is it? He glanced around, voice dropping. From what I can piece together, it's a contingency plan. If they lose control of the simulation, if people start to question the base reality, they trigger a system reset. Wipe everything, start over. My skin went cold. Everyone dies. Not dies, he said quietly. They never existed in the first place. I stared at him, trying to absorb it. If that was true, if they had the power to erase the past itself, then no evidence would ever matter. The only way to win was to expose them before they pulled the trigger. I stood. I have to go, I said. Leo put a hand on my arm. Be careful, they'll come for you. I know. I left by the alley door, my pulse loud in my ears. As I walked toward the main road, I felt a vibration against my ribs. My phone, I pulled it out. Another text from the unknown number. You were warned. I looked up. Across the street, a man in a dark jacket stood beside a delivery van. He wasn't moving, just watching me. I turned and walked quickly the other way. I didn't look back. By the time I reached the underground station, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving me hollow and shivering. But as the train rumbled south, I gripped my bag tighter and made myself a promise. If they were going to erase me, I would make sure the truth survived. The train rolled through the Channel Tunnel while I tried to steady my breathing. For the first time in days, I was leaving London behind. I watched my reflection in the dark window, my face pale, my eyes rimmed in fatigue. I didn't recognize myself. Part of me kept replaying the moment in the Café Leo's face when he mentioned the Reset Doctrine, a plan to erase everything. It sounded impossible, but I'd seen enough to stop dismissing the impossible. When I reached Paris, I switched trains again, heading southeast. My destination was a small town outside Geneva, where I'd arranged to meet two people who might be able to help me understand what the custodians were doing. They weren't strangers, exactly. They were names Axel had mentioned in his final logs. Alina Verdera, a quantum architect, and Marcus Neville, an engineer who once maintained the custodians' global relay systems. I knew enough to be afraid of them, but I was also out of options. The safe house was tucked into the foothills, an old ski lodge converted into something that looked more like a war room. I approached on foot, climbing a winding path while the wind cut through my coat. My legs ached, but I didn't stop. I needed to believe there were others who hadn't given up. When I reached the porch, the door swung open before I could knock. A tall woman stood there, her hair pulled back in a severe braid. She looked me over without a word, then stepped aside. "You're Myra," she said finally, her accent soft but precise. "Yes, Alina," she said, offering her hand. "You were followed." "I don't think so. I changed trains 3. "Time's good," she said, "but we'll sweep your bag anyway." I nodded. She led me inside, where Marcus was waiting near a bank of monitors. He looked nothing like I'd expected, broad-shouldered, dressed in jeans and an old wool sweater, a cigarette smoldering between his fingers. His eyes were quick, assessing. "You came alone?" he asked. "Yes." He glanced at Alina, who gave a single nod. "Then let's get started." he said. They led me to a long table clotted with papers, drives, and a row of battery-powered lamps. The windows were covered with thick black curtains. Every so often, the lights flickered as if the generator struggled under the load. Alina picked up a file and handed it to me. Inside were scans of trial records experiments I'd never seen published, all stamped confidential and marked with the custodian seal. They were testing consciousness backups, she said quietly. Routine snapshots of higher-risk individuals. If you became a liability, they could erase you and reload a version of you that never asked questions. I tried to process it. Reload, like restoring a hard drive. Exactly, Marcus said. And they weren't subtle about it. They tested the process on volunteers who didn't understand what they'd signed. I set the file down before my hands could start shaking. Alina opened her laptop and brought up a series of logs timestamps, code snippets, system commands I couldn't fully decipher. These are fragments of their maintenance schema, she said. Most of it is routine, but there are patterns, here commands, that don't belong. She pointed to a line of code. Meta, signal, initiate. Observe. I looked at her blankly. What does that mean? It's a trigger, she said. They were testing signals broadcasts that would prime consciousness to accept edits. A kind of psychological softening. You wouldn't know it was happening. I felt nausea rise in my throat. Marcus stubbed out his cigarette and leaned closer. We think they're preparing something bigger, he said. You've heard about the reset doctrine? Yes. Then you know why we have to act before they deploy it, Alina said. I didn't answer. I was thinking about Axel's face in that last video, how tired he'd looked, how certain, after a moment. Alina pushed a worn, leather-bound journal across the table. This is from one of the architects who designed the early simulation layers, she said. It's not data tits, a record of what they were trying to do. I opened it carefully. The pages were covered in precise sketches, diagrams of neural pathways, timelines annotated with symbols I couldn't decipher. In the margins, someone had written a phrase over and over. The architects will return to test the veil. I traced the letters with my fingertip. What does this mean? I whispered. Marcus shifted, his face unreadable. We don't know, but we think it's a reference to the base reality, that this is only one layer. I closed the journal, pressing it to my chest. My heart was racing. Alina exhaled slowly, her voice gentler now. I know this is a lot, she said, but you have to decide. If you help us decrypt the rest of the schema, you'll be a target. They'll know you're here. I looked from her to Marcus, then back at the journal. Do you really think we can stop them? I asked. Marcus's mouth twisted into something almost like a smile. No, he said, but we might be able to buy time. The silence that followed felt heavy. I thought about London, about the man watching me from across the street. I thought about Axel's voice in the dark. All right, I said. Tell me what you need. For the next 3 hours, we worked in near silence. Translated lines of code while Marcus built a map of the custodian's network infrastructure. I kept my hands busy sorting files, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Every so often, the lamps flickered, and I imagined armed men outside the walls, waiting for the right moment to come in. It was Marcus who finally broke the quiet. Look, he said, pointing to a blinking cursor on his screen. They're watching the network traffic. Someone is flagging every access request. Can you trace it? I asked. Maybe, but it won't be safe. Do it, I said. He typed. quickly, eyes locked on the screen. A progress bar crept across the monitor, painfully slow. When it finished, he leaned back and blew out a breath. "They're routing everything through a relay in Zurich," he said. "But the operator's tag is familiar." He scrolled down, revealing a single line of metadata. Operator Anne Duponte felt my pulse stutter. Anne, the ex-CIA hacker Axel had worked with before he vanished. Alina met my gaze. "She could be a threat," she said. "Or an ally," I said softly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're willing to bet your life on that?" "I don't know," I said honestly. But something in my chest felt lighter for the first time in days. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Outside, the wind howled against the walls. I realized how far I'd come, how far they were still. To go, Alina closed her laptop and rubbed her eyes. "We can finish the decryption in 2 days," she said. "But we'll need a secure site. This place is burned." "I know somewhere," Marcus said. "An old lab in Messina. No network connections, no cameras." "Then that's where we go," I said. Alina nodded. "Rest while you can," she said. "They won't give us many chances." I lay down on a narrow cot in the corner, the journal still in my hand. I tried to tell myself it would be all right, that we would find a way to stop them. But the truth was simpler. I didn't know what would happen, only that I wouldn't stop until I had answers. We left the safe house before dawn. The old diesel van Marcus had arranged looked like something a construction crew might abandon, rust blooming along the doors. In the dim light, it blended into the road so well I felt almost invisible. That was comforting, though the feeling didn't last. Alina sat beside me, her gaze fixed on the winding mountain road. Marcus drove with both hands clenched on the wheel. I could tell he was thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. I didn't blame him. Marseille was almost 10 hours away. We didn't talk much during the drive. When we stopped for fuel, Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and muttered that he felt watched. I felt it too, like something was pressing against the back of my neck, waiting for me to look over my shoulder. By late afternoon, the van rattled through an industrial zone. On the outskirts of the city, abandoned warehouses and half-built offices loomed on either side. Finally, Marcus pulled into a narrow alley and killed the engine. "This is it," he said quietly. The lab didn't look like much, just a squat concrete block with boarded up windows, but inside it was another world. Rows of metal cabinets lined the walls, and a long table had been cleared for our equipment. In the corner stood a bank of old servers, their lights dark but intact. Alina walked a slow circle around the room, checking every window and door. Satisfied, she nodded. "We'll have a few hours," she said. Marcus and I unpacked the drives and laptops. My hands were steady, though my heart was doing a strange, unsteady dance behind my ribs. This was the closest I'd come to understanding what Axel had died for. The data Alina and Marcus had decrypted was incomplete encryption, fragments that needed to be recombined with something called the Neuralink control stream. The stream was a live feed of signals from the custodians, implants experimental brain-computer interfaces used in their simulations. "You're sure the facility is running a live stream tonight?" I asked. Marcus nodded. "Positive. It's the monthly calibration cycle. If we can intercept it, we'll see their commands in real time." Alina unrolled a schematic on the table, a floor plan of the Neuralink testing center across town. "There's a maintenance access corridor here," she said, tapping a thin hallway behind the main server room. "Minimal security. If we get in quietly, we can jack into the stream without tripping alarms." I swallowed. And if we're caught? Alina didn't answer. She didn't have to. We worked until nightfall, checking and rechecking the infiltration plan. As the sky darkened, the air in the lab grew heavy. My thoughts drifted to Axel, again how he must have felt the night he realized none of this was theory anymore. When we finally stepped out into the cold, I almost turned back, but something in me had shifted. All the fear and doubt had been reduced to a single fact. If we didn't act now, we might never have another chance. The facility was an unremarkable 3-story building surrounded by chain-link fencing. We parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. Alina led the way, moving with the quiet certainty of someone who'd broken into labs before at the rear of the building. She crouched by a service panel and pried it, open with a small tool. Wires glinted in the moonlight as she worked. 30 seconds, she murmured. I kept watch, my breath clouding in the cold air. Every second stretched impossibly long. Finally, she nodded. Doors open. Inside, the maintenance corridor smelled of disinfectant and old plaster. Our footsteps were muffled by the layers of dust. We moved past a row of locked storage rooms and stopped at a junction. Marked with a biohazard sign, Marcus pulled a tablet from his bag and connected a small device to the wall port. A low hum filled the space, and a series of green lights flickered. To life, I'm in, he whispered. I stood behind him, staring at the stream of data that began to crawl across the screen. Lines of code, timestamps, and commands I barely understood. But even I recognized the markers labeled per system, halt, and /clock/adjust. It was proof. Proof that the simulation was being maintained like software. Alina glanced at me. This is it. Copy everything. Marcus tapped the screen, launching the data capture process. The tablet began to fill with lines of raw command logs, thousands of them. I exhaled, a shaky relief washing over me. For one surreal moment, I thought maybe it would be that simple. Then the lights in the corridor flickered. Marcus looked up. Sharply, power fluctuation, he said. But I heard something else, a soft, mechanical worry that grew louder with each passing second. Alina drew a small pistol from her coat and backed against the wall. Backup protocols, she said quietly. They know. I looked down the corridor just as a small drone rounded the corner. It hovered in mid-air, a single red sensor blinking. Stay calm, Marcus said, but his voice was tight. The drone emitted a burst of static, and a speaker crackled to life. This is a restricted area. Identify yourselves. None of us moved. A second drone appeared behind the first. Then a third. Alina fired once, the shot impossibly loud in the tight space. The first drone jerked sideways and crashed to the floor in a sparking heap. The others swiveled their sensors toward us. Get the data, she shouted. Marcus ripped the tablet free of the port and stuffed it into his bag. I grabbed his arm, pulling him back toward the exit. A high-pitched alarm started to wail, and red lights strobed along the ceiling. My chest felt too tight, my vision tunneling. We ran. I heard a burst of something behind me, like compressed air or gas, and felt a stinging pain in my calf. My leg buckled, but I forced myself to keep moving. At the service door, Alina paused to fire 2 more shots. Then she shoved me into the alley. Go, she shouted. We sprinted back toward the van. Marcus threw the tablet onto the passenger seat and climbed behind the wheel. As soon as we were moving, I slumped against the door, clutching my leg. Alina sat beside me, her face pale and set. Did you get enough? I managed to ask. Marcus didn't look away from the road. I think so, he said. The van roared onto the main road, and I risked a look back. Blue lights flashed across the facade of the building. A line of security vehicles pulled up, their doors swinging open. We didn't slow down. When we were finally out of the city, Marcus took the first exit and pulled into a dark industrial park. He killed the engine and sat breathing hard. Alina turned to me, her expression unreadable. You're hurt. I'll live. She nodded once, then pulled a tablet from Marcus's bag. Let's see what we have, she said. I watched as she navigated to the captured logs. She scrolled slowly, her finger hovering over the screen. Then she stopped. There, she whispered. I leaned closer. One line of text was highlighted in red: :root/admin/observe. Mira Thornton. I felt everything inside me go still. They know my name, I said quietly. Alina looked up, her eyes meeting mine. They've been watching you for longer than you think. I swallowed, my throat dry. Can you delete it? No, she said. But we can use it. I frowned. How? She turned the tablet so I could see. This is more than surveillance. It's a command log. If we can learn to write these instructions, we might be able to force the system to reveal itself. My mind struggled to process it. You mean, take control? Maybe not control, she said, but access. Transparency. Outside, the night was utterly silent. In that moment, I realized how far I'd fallen from the life I'd once trusted, and how much deeper I was willing to go. I didn't sleep after Marseille. None of us did. We spent that first night hiding in an abandoned textile mill while Alina picked through the command logs we'd stolen. The cold sank into my bones, but I hardly noticed. My mind was too crowded with images security drones gliding through. Dark hallways, that single line of red text with my name. I had always told myself that if I could see the truth plainly, I would feel stronger. But clarity had its own kind of terror. At dawn, we moved again, driving south along back roads with no destination beyond a temporary sense of safety. Alina and Marcus took turns watching the horizon for pursuers. I studied the tablet every moment. We weren't in motion. By late afternoon, we parked in the shadows of an abandoned toll station. Marcus cracked open a thermos of coffee that smelled burnt, but I drank it anyway. My hands were trembling as I opened a folder labeled Patch Metadata Archive. For the first few minutes, the files made no sense. They were mostly reference tables columns of timestamps, checksum signatures, code hashes. But when I scrolled further, something shifted. The timestamps didn't match known historical records. Some were off by hours, some by days, and some my throat tightened were off by decades. I clicked a log at random.patch. ID, Delta 1973, 20412. Operation Timeline Correction, Observer. Probability Matrix, Reset Target Region, Western United States. Note below it, Public Record Amended. Witness logs purged. Probability variance reduced to 0.2%. I looked up at Marcus. They're not just adjusting memory, I whispered. They're changing history itself. He nodded, his expression grim. Keep going, he said. I opened another file. Patch ID, Theta-1, 908-0629. Event, Energy Release, Anomaly, Containment Failure, Action, Temporal Rollback, 72 hours, the date. Hit me like a blow. Tunguska, I said softly. Alina leaned over my shoulder. What is that? An explosion in Siberia. Officially a meteor impact, I said. But this says it was a containment failure. Marcus muttered a curse. They rewound time. Erased 3 days, he said. I felt like I was seeing everything through a sheet of glass. My mind struggled to accept that entire stretches of history might have been rerun, smoothed over to look like accidents. We cross-referenced the logs against declassified event archives military records. Weather anomalies, unexplained disappearances. The pattern became undeniable. Elena drew up a list of 3 major anomalies with matching patch IDs. The Tunguska event, 1908. The Philadelphia experiment, rumors, 1943. A classified incident in 1973 referred to as the DeLorean time capsule. Each time, the custodians had issued a rollback and corrected the timeline. What if there are more? I asked. Marcus looked up from his laptop. There will be. These are just the ones they logged. The air felt thinner, like the van itself was too small to contain this knowledge. I closed the tablet and tried to steady my thoughts. But the more I turned the evidence over in my mind, the clearer it became. If the custodians could manipulate history, every piece of proof we gathered could be erased tomorrow. Elena rested a hand on my shoulder. There's one thing they can't erase, she said quietly. The decoder chip. I nodded. If we can reverse engineer it, we might be able to undo their edits. Or at least expose them, Marcus added. The plan that took shape was desperate, but it was all we had. Infiltrate the National Archives facility in Geneva, where Axel had last tried to recover patch metadata. If any record of their edits remained uncorrupted, it would be there. We waited for nightfall. Every hour felt longer than the last. I kept checking the road outside, expecting headlights to appear. But nothing came. When it was time, Marcus pulled the van onto a narrow service road that skirted the Swiss border. We didn't speak. The tension had grown beyond words. The Geneva archives were housed in a massive concrete building that looked as if it had been built to withstand a siege. Floodlights lit the grounds in harsh white pools. But we had one advantage. Marcus had worked on the original security systems years before he defected. He led us along the fence line to a service tunnel hidden behind a row of ventilation stacks. The door lock was old, mechanical rather than digital. He cracked it open in minutes. Inside, the air smelled of cold concrete and stale paper. My footsteps echoed off the walls as we crept deeper past rows of numbered doors. We reached the main archive hall, a cavernous space filled with high-density storage racks. Each row was labeled with an alphanumeric code. Elena pulled out a small LED torch and flipped through her notes. Section 39, she whispered. We moved together, our shadows stretching across the polished floor. I kept thinking of all the people who'd passed through here, never knowing that the truth was hidden in plain sight at the end of the aisle. Marcus found a secured cabinet marked patch metadata, restricted. He produced a set of lockpicks and went to work. Each second felt like an eternity. When the latch clicked open, I held my breath. Inside, stacked neatly in numbered sleeves, were reels of magnetic tape and a small safe bolted to the back wall. Elena reached for the safe, her fingers trailing over the keypad. He left something here, she murmured. She punched in a code, Axel's birth date. The safe clicked open. Inside lay a single microchip in a protective case. I picked it up carefully. It was smaller than my thumb, but I knew it was the most dangerous thing I'd ever held. The patch decoder, I whispered. Elena exhaled, her breath shaking. Let's copy everything, Marcus said. He connected a portable reader to the reels of tape and started the transfer. Lines of data scrolled past on his screen. Halfway through, the lights flickered. Alina and I froze. Marcus glanced up, his voice low. They're rerouting power. I swallowed, my throat dry. How much time? Minutes, he said. I checked. The transfer bar, 70%. The lights flickered again, then a siren wailed somewhere deep in the building. Marcus cursed and yanked the reader free. Take it, he shouted, shoving the partial copy into my hands. We ran as we reached the end of the aisle. The emergency doors slammed down, cutting off our path. This way, Alina called, leading us through a side corridor. I followed, clutching the decoder chip to my chest. Behind us, the lights died. We moved by the beam of Elena's torch. My lungs burned at last. We burst into a loading bay where the van was waiting. Marcus leapt behind the wheel as Alina and I scrambled inside. The engine roared. The tires screamed against the concrete. As we tore out of the facility, none of us spoke until we were clear of the city lights. Then Alina turned to me, her face pale. How much did we lose? I looked down at the reader in my lap. The transfer log blinked a grim confirmation. Partial copy to 48% integrity. I closed my eyes. Half the data is corrupted. I said. Alina swallowed hard. It might be enough, she whispered. I wanted to believe her, but as the van sped into the night, I couldn't shake the knowledge that we were running out of time, and the custodians knew exactly where to find us. We drove for hours after the archives, trying to put as much distance between ourselves and Geneva as we could. The partial decoder logs sat on my lap, the tiny blinking reader like a fragile heartbeat. I kept one hand over it the whole way, as though that could protect it from what was coming. No one spoke until we crossed the border into Italy. By then, dawn had turned the mountains grey and gold. Marcus finally pulled off onto a dirt road and killed the engine. He didn't look at me when he spoke. If we keep running without allies, we'll burn out, or they'll corner us. He was right. My chest tightened as I realized how small our chances really were. Alina turned to me. You said Axel mentioned other insiders people who regretted helping the custodians. Yes. I pulled out my notebook, flipping to the last page. He listed 2 names. Dr. Alina Verderer. That's me, she said with a dry smile, and Marcus Neville. Marcus gave a humorless laugh. Small world, he muttered. But there was one more, I said, tracing the line with my fingertip. A systems engineer. Marcus called him Patch. Marcus looked up. Sharply, Patch is alive. That's what Axel believed, I said. Then we find him, Marcus said. Alina closed her eyes, rubbing her temples. I still have contacts on the dark web, she said. If Patch is anywhere, someone will know. I watched her dial into a secure laptop, her fingers steady even though her face had gone pale. In that moment, I envied her ability to look calm. Inside, I felt like every nerve was lit up. While she worked, I stepped out of the van. The cold morning air burned my lungs, but it helped clear my head. I watched the sun climbing over the ridgeline and tried to imagine a world where none of this was necessary, where I was back in my office at the Bellamy Institute, reading papers and giving lectures. But that world was gone. If it had ever been real, Alina called me back inside. I have a lead, she said. Encrypted chats between an account tagged as Patch and a fixer in the Alps. He's agreed to meet. Marcus frowned. And you trust this fixer? No, she said simply. But we don't have time to wait, I added. Alina looked at me. It's your call, she said quietly. I thought about Axel's warnings, about the footage of the custodians erasing entire timelines. If we didn't take risks now, nothing would change. Let's go, I said. We arranged the meeting for that evening in a mountain cabin an hour north of Milan. The fixer insisted on using the place because it had no network signal, no chance of remote interference. On the drive there, I kept glancing at the decoder chip in my bag, half convinced it would vanish the moment I looked away. Every time a car appeared behind us, my pulse spiked. By dusk, we were parked outside a sagging wooden structure that smelled of damp pine. Marcus kept the engine running while Alina and I climbed the porch steps. Inside, the air was stale and cold. A single lantern burned on the table. 2 figures sat across from each other. One was a woman in her 50s with cropped silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She stood as we entered. Dr. Thornton, she said. I'm Alina Vedatar. Blinked in confusion, then realized she meant the real Alina Verderaxel's collaborator. The woman beside her gave a cautious nod. And this is Marcus Neville, she said, gesturing to the man across from her. I felt my breath catch. This Marcus was lean, hollow-cheeked, wearing an old field jacket. His eyes flicked to me, and for a moment I saw something familiar, an exhaustion I recognized in myself. Your patch, I whispered. He inclined his head. Some still call me that. Alina, our Alina exhaled softly, as though she'd been holding her breath since we left Geneva. The real Alina sat back down. We know why you're here, she said. But before we help you, you need to hear what we've seen. I took the chair opposite her, my hands folded tightly to hide their shaking. She picked up a thick folder and passed it to me. Inside were pages of Teslog diaries notes, scribbled in dense handwriting. These are from the first consciousness backup trials, she said. They started decades before Neuralink was public. Volunteers were told they were testing new cognitive therapies. In reality, they were being copied and recopied to see how much memory decay the human mind could endure. I turned the pages slowly, feeling sicker with each one. Subject 7 reports overlapping timelines. Insists she recalls to conflicting pasts. Subject 9 identifies researcher from facility he never visited. Suggests partial bleed-through. They were running parallel simulations, Patch said quietly. When errors happened, they'd merge timelines to hide it. I looked up at him. How many people? No one knows, he said. Thousands, maybe more. A silence fell over the room, heavy as a burial. Alina cleared her throat. The reason we agreed to meet is because we want this to end. But we can't do it alone. I tried to find my voice. We have the decoder chip, but the data is incomplete. If you help us reconstruct it, we might be able to undo some of what they've changed. Patch rubbed his jaw. I have blueprints of the hidden server arrays. The custodians store raw consciousness archives. There, if you can get inside, you could patch the gaps where I asked. He held my gaze. Zurich, he said, but if you go in, you won't come out the same. I thought of Kareem, the neuroscientist Axel had trusted. The man who had stared into the code and whispered about boundary errors. I closed the folder, my decision already made. When do we leave? Patch glanced at the real Alina, who nodded tonight, he said. I swallowed. What do you want in return? He looked down at his hands. A chance to make amends, he said softly. I didn't trust him, not fully. But in that moment, I realized trust wasn't the point anymore. None of us were clean. All we could do was pick a side. Marcus entered. Then, his face drawn. "We've got movement on the main road," he said. "Black SUVs, no plates." My stomach turned to ice. Patch stood, gathering his things. "They found us," he said. I slipped the decoder chip into my pocket and followed him out the back door. Alina gripped my shoulder. "No matter what happens, don't let them take that." "Chip," she said. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. We fled through the trees, our breath clouding in the freezing air. Behind us, headlights sliced through the dark. Every step felt like a line I couldn't uncross. And as we disappeared into the woods, I knew that whatever waited in Zurich would be the hardest truth yet. I always thought Leo was the bravest among us, though he'd deny it if you asked. He was the one who moved toward the fire, even when the rest of us hesitated. Maybe that was why I trusted him to follow a lead I couldn't afford to pursue myself. While we prepared to infiltrate the Zurich server arrays, Leo flew to Hong Kong. He'd picked up whispers of an underground auction military-grade Neuralink research tools, the kind the custodians used to harvest consciousness backups. We agreed the gear could help us reconstruct the missing decoder data. It could also, if we were lucky, prove that the reset doctrine was more than a rumor. I didn't hear from him for 2 days. In those hours, my imagination became my worst enemy. I pictured him detained at customs, or worse, already disappeared into a black site somewhere. When his message finally arrived, it was just a single line: "Meeting tonight. Keep your line clear." I read it over and over, trying to convince myself it was good news. But my stomach stayed tight. Leo always said he thrived on adrenaline. But as the hours passed, I started to wonder how much of that was bravado. In the safe house we'd set up near Zurich, I paced the main room while Alina and Patch argued over the decryption sequence. Their voices rose and fell in clipped bursts. I tried to listen, but all I could think about was Leo. Somewhere in Kowloon, alone with a briefcase full of stolen tech and no backup. Just after midnight, he called. His voice came through the line, thin and ragged. "It's me," he said. "Are you safe?" "I don't know yet," he replied. "I've got something, Myra. Something big." "What is it?" He took a shaky breath. "Simulation artifacts. Not just schematics, physical drives. Whoever smuggled them out was sloppy. I've got photos. You need to see them." "Where are you?" "Warehouse off Tongmi Road." "I don't think I'm alone anymore." The line went silent. I waited, holding my breath. When he spoke again, his voice was a whisper. "Someone's here." I pressed my palm against my forehead, trying to think. "Leo, you need to get out." "I will," he said. "Sending you the files now." A chime sounded from my laptop. His email arrived, attachments already uploading. I closed my eyes. "Be careful." Then the call dropped. The others fell silent as I replayed his words in my head. Alina looked at me, her face pale. "If they catch him with those drives, they won't," I said, though I had no idea if it was true. I stayed by the laptop. As the files trickled in, one after another, blurry photographs of microchips sealed in evidence bags. Handwritten labels I couldn't decipher, but one image froze me. A golden-etched fragment with the same simulation signature we'd found on the Neuralink commands. I enlarged the photo, tracing the markings with my fingertip. Proof. If Leo could get that fragment out, It would mean everything. I tried to call him back, but the line was dead. The next hours were some of the longest of my life. I sat by the window, watching the empty road, telling myself he was okay. When the phone finally rang again, I nearly dropped it. His voice was hoarse but steady. "I'm out," he said. "Where are you?" "Safe house in Mungkok," he said. "But the auction site mirror, they knew I was coming." I swallowed. How? I don't know. Maybe a leak. Maybe they were watching the whole thing. Doesn't matter. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked. "The dealer who sold me the drives, he's dead." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry." He knew the risk, Leo said softly. "But the way they did it, Tit, wasn't just a kill. They set the place on fire." I imagined the warehouse walls caving in, flames erasing every trace of what he'd found. "Did you keep any of the drives?" I asked. "I have one," he said. "The golden fragment. Everything else is gone." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he cleared his throat. "I'll be on the next flight out. I'm not staying here a minute longer than I have to." "Good," I whispered when the call ended. I turned back to the others. Alina was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. "You trust him?" she said. "Yes," I replied. Patch looked skeptical. "If they knew he was coming, they could be tracking him now." "Then we'll be ready," I said. But later, as I sat alone in the dark, I couldn't stop thinking about that warehouse, about the man who had died to get us that fragment. When Leo arrived 2 days later, he looked older somehow. There were new lines around his eyes. We barely spoke as he handed me the drive. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it. "Did anyone follow you?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't think so, but we shouldn't stay here long." I nodded that night. We studied the golden fragment together. The etching was almost too fine to see without magnification. Alina set up a small scanning rig and began mapping the pattern. After hours of work, she looked up, her face pale. "This isn't just a control fragment," she whispered. "What do you mean?" I asked. She swallowed. "It's part of a seed code. The original initialization sequence." My heart hammered against my ribs. "You're saying if we can complete this," she said, "we might be able to prove beyond any doubt that the simulation is artificial." Patch leaned forward, his expression tight. "Or," he said quietly, "we trigger something none of us can control." Silence settled over the room. Leo rubbed his temples. I saw the look on those men's faces when they came for the dealer. He said, "They didn't care about money. They were afraid." I nodded slowly. "They're afraid of what happens if the truth gets out." I said. Alina turned the fragment in her hands, the lamplight catching on the gold. "Then we have to finish this," she said. I knew she was right, but as I lay awake that night, listening to the others breathing in the dark, I felt a strange new dread. It wasn't just the custodians I feared anymore. It was the possibility that the simulation itself might fight back. I'd met Dr. Karim Hassan only once before all this started. He was the keynote speaker at a conference in Berlin, and I remember thinking how young he seemed to be leading research into brain-computer interfaces. He had a gentle, open way of explaining things, like he genuinely believed knowledge should belong to everyone now. Months later, that same gentle man sat across from me at an old wooden table in the basement of an abandoned subway station. We had chosen this place because it was cut off from the main power grid and had no wireless signals somewhere. The custodians couldn't find us as easily. Karim looked thinner than I remembered. His curly hair had grown longer and dark circles pooled under his eyes. He glanced at the golden fragment on the table between us, as if it was something alive. "You're sure it's safe?" he asked, voice low. "No," I admitted. He let out a tired laugh. "Good, as long as we're honest." We all knew this was reckless. But after Leo's narrow escape, it felt like time was closing in. The fragment was only a partial map of the seed code. If we didn't reconstruct the missing sections, everything else we'd done Axel's sacrifice, the archives, the data logs would be worthless. Karim was convinced he could help. He'd built a rudimentary neural interface, pieced together from old Neuralink prototypes and scavenged lab equipment. If he could connect his mind to the fragments' encoded patterns, he believed he could decode them faster than any computer. I wanted to say no, to tell him it was too dangerous, that there had to be another way. But when I looked at him, I saw the same exhaustion that haunted me. The knowledge that none of us were getting out of this clean. He began setting up the rig in the middle of the concrete floor. Thick black cables wound between salvaged processors. A small monitor flickered to life, showing a single prompt. "Signal ready. Alina checked his vitals, while I held the decoder fragment in gloved hands. "Once I'm connected, don't stop the upload unless I say," Karim said. Even if I look wrong, my throat tightened. "What do you mean?" He met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw fear there. "I've read Axel's notes. If the simulation is aware of intrusion, it might fight back, but we have to know." Nodded, unable to find words. Karim climbed into the chair, fitting the crown of electrodes over his head. A thin line of sweat ran down his temple. Alina connected the final cables. The monitor blinked, signal engaged. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then Karim's breathing grew shallow. His eyelids fluttered. "Karim," Alina called. His voice came out in a rasp. I see. Layers. What do you mean?" I asked. He swallowed, his hands flexing against the armrests. "Reality, it's like a stack of images," he said, the words slow and broken, one over the other. "I can see the code in the spaces." The monitor beeped. His heart rate was climbing fast. I stepped closer, fighting the urge to pull the plug. "Describe it," I said softly. He drew a shaky breath. "Pixelation," he whispered. "Round the edges, I can see adjustment commands, like threads, pulling the world back together." The screen beside him lit up with lines of text, partial code strings. Alina scrambled to record them, but Karim's face twisted, a look of pure confusion. "They're rewriting me," he choked out. I felt something cold slide down my spine. "Karim," his body jerked once, then again. The monitor's tone spiked. I reached for the power switch, but Alina grabbed my wrist. "Wait, he's still conscious." Karim's eyes opened, but they didn't look like his eyes anymore. The pupils had dilated until there was almost no brown left. "Kernel panic," he gasped. I froze. A kernel panic was a complete system failure, something you saw in machines, not people. "Alina, I'm stopping this," I said, voice trembling. But before I could move, Karim let out a slow, shuddering breath. His body slumped in the chair. The monitor fell silent. For a moment, I thought he'd died. Then his chest rose, again just barely. I pressed 2 fingers to his neck. A pulse, weak but steady. Alina unfastened the electrodes with shaking hands. When Karim finally looked up at us, his eyes were clearer, but there was something distant in them, as if part of him hadn't come back. "Did you see anything else?" I asked quietly. He nodded. his voice no louder than a whisper. "A map," he said, "between the layers, but it's incomplete." Alina set the golden fragment back in its case. "Is it enough to reconstruct the missing sequence?" Kareem closed his eyes. "I think so," he said. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt hollow. Later, as he rested, Alina and I sat in the far corner of the room. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. "You shouldn't blame yourself," she said. "He trusted me," I whispered, "and I let him do this. He made his own choice." I looked over at Kareem, still hooked to a drip. His face was so still. What if this is what they want? I asked. Alina frowned. "Who?" "The custodians," I said. "Or whatever runs the simulation. What if us trying to expose it is just another parameter to be managed?" She didn't answer. In that silence, the old subway station felt impossibly vast. When dawn came, Kareem stirred. He looked around the room like he didn't recognize it. "Are you all right?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "I think so," he said. "But I remember more." He gestured for a piece of paper. Alina handed him a pencil, and he began sketching lines and circles, strange symbols I'd never seen. "What is that?" I asked. His hand didn't pause. "The architecture," he whispered, "where the simulation stores its memory states." I felt my breath catch. "If we can get inside," he said, "we can see everything. Not just patches, not just edits, everything." I didn't know whether to feel hope or dread. Probably both, but as he worked, I realized something simple and terrifying. This wasn't just about proving that simulation existed. It was about deciding what to do when we finally looked behind the curtain. In the weeks that followed Kareem's experiment, we tried to stay ahead of the custodians. We moved constantly, never sleeping in the same place twice. Our small circle had shrunk and hardened into something I didn't quite have a name for more than allies, but not quite friends. Every time we opened a new fragment of the seed code or decrypted another server log, I felt us inch closer to something final. But I also felt something else, an uneasy pressure in my chest I couldn't shake. Then, one morning, Anne DuPont disappeared. We hadn't known her long. Kareem vouched for her. He'd met her years before, when she was still with the CIA. She was the last person I thought would betray us. The first sign that something was wrong was when I woke up in our rented farmhouse outside Marseille and realized her cot was empty. At first, I tried to tell myself she'd just gone for supplies. But when an hour passed and she didn't return, the dread settled in. I found Kareem and Alina in the main room, hunched over the latest schematics of the Zurich server complex. They looked up when I came in. "Anne is gone," I said. Alina frowned. "How long? Since last night?" "Maybe longer." Kareem pushed his glasses up his nose. "She wouldn't just leave." I wasn't sure. The seed code was worth more than any of us understood. And Anne had always been hard to read. Calm, precise, a little too willing to disappear when it suited her. We split up to search the grounds. In the garage, I found her pack still hanging on a hook, half unzipped. But her laptop was missing. That told me everything I needed to know. By the time I returned to the kitchen, Marcus was on the satellite phone, his voice tight. "We have to assume she's compromised," he said when he hung up. Kareem shook his head. "She wouldn't." "She did," Marcus cut in. "Her access logs show she downloaded our safe house coordinates and the partial decoder schema at 3 in the morning. I felt a strange stillness settle over me. I thought I'd feel rage or panic, but mostly I felt hollow. "Can we track her?" I asked. Alina gestured to the laptop. "I tried. She's routing her signal through at least 6 proxies. Marcus swore under his breath. I turned to Kareem. Did she say anything to you? No, he whispered. Nothing. I closed my eyes. I'd trusted her. We all had. Then Marcus's phone vibrated on the table. An incoming message. He picked it up, read it, and handed it to me without a word. It was from Anne. Myra, I'm sorry. They have my sister. I didn't see another way. Meet me at the old naval yard in Marseille tonight. Come alone. I read it twice before lowering the phone. She says she's being coerced, I said. Marcus rubbed his eyes. It's a trap, I know, I said. But if she's telling the truth... No, Alina said firmly. You can't do this. I have to. Kareem stood, voice soft. Then we'll go with you. I shook my head. She asked me to come alone. Exactly, Marcus said, so they can take you and finish this. I looked at each of them. In turn, I saw the same fear in their faces that was twisting in my own chest. But Anas's words kept echoing in my mind. They have my sister. I couldn't ignore that, even if it meant walking straight into the custodian's hands. I'll go, I said. No one argued after that. That night, I dressed in black and left the farmhouse just after sunset. Kareem slipped me a tiny transmitter one last line of defense. In case things went bad. The naval yard was a ruin of steel and concrete along the water. Cargo cranes loomed overhead like dead giants. I kept to the shadows, my breath clouding in the cold air. I spotted Anne near a rusted container. She looked smaller somehow, her hair tied back in a tight knot. Her eyes found mine, and I saw a flicker of something guilt, maybe. You came, she said. Tell me this isn't what it looks like, I said quietly. She swallowed. They showed me a video. My sister in a cell. They said if I didn't deliver the decoder chip, they'd kill her. Who? I asked. The custodians, she said. Silascade's retrieval squad. They're close. My heart thudded so hard I thought she could hear it. Then give me the coordinates, I said. I'll help you get her back. I can't, she whispered. They said if I tried, they'd end her transmission. I stepped closer. Anne, a voice cut through the dark. That's enough. Lights flared on all sides. My eyes stung as men stepped out of the shadows, weapons raised. Anne flinched. But she didn't move. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, strode forward. Silascade. I'd seen his photo in Axel's files. He stopped a few feet away, his face as calm as if we were meeting for coffee. Dr. Thornton, he said, this doesn't have to end badly. My hands curled into fists. You think I'll just hand it over? I said. He tilted his head. You already have, Ms. Dupont. Download included the decoder. I glanced at Anne. She looked down. I'm sorry, she whispered. Something in me cracked. Before I could speak, a shot rang out. Chaos erupted. Marcus's voice roared in my earpiece. Move. Smoke grenades burst open, filling the yard with choking grey. Shapes blurred as figures stumbled and fired blindly. I lunged for Anne, grabbing her arm. Come with me, I shouted. She shook her head, tears streaking her face. Go, she yelled. I'll hold them. I hesitated one breath, one heartbeat. Then she shoved me so hard I almost fell. I ran. Bullets slammed into the containers around me. I didn't look back. I found Marcus and Kareem crouched behind an old forklift. Marcus hauled me down beside them, his face slick with sweat. Where is she? He demanded. She stayed, I gasped. he swore. In the distance, I saw Anne darting between shadows, drawing fire away from us. We moved fast, slipping through the chaos. When we reached the van, Alina flung open the door. "Go," she yelled. As we sped away, I turned in my seat, searching the dark yard for any sign of Anne. But she was gone. No one spoke on the drive back. The van's engine droned under the weight of what had just happened. When we finally stopped in the hills outside the city, I climbed out and stood in the cold. Marcus joined me after a while. "She bought us time," he said quietly. I nodded, unable to find words. Kareem emerged, holding the backup implant. "She didn't get everything," he said. "We still have this." I looked at the small capsule in his hand. It held the last piece of the decoder, our only hope. But all I could think about was Anis's face, the way she'd looked at me as she disappeared into the dark. I didn't know if she'd survive, but I knew she'd made her choice, and I would make mine. I didn't expect the old stories to feel more dangerous than any gun. But that was before I began to understand how long the custodian's influence had been shaping us before. I realized that some conspiracies don't start in boardrooms or labs. They start in the myths we tell ourselves to feel safe. After Anne vanished, none of us slept much. We retreated into the hills above Marseille, using an abandoned monastery as our refuge. Kareem spent hours hunched over the neural implant backup, trying to reconstruct the missing decoder data. Marcus focused on securing our perimeter, placing tripwires and motion sensors. I found myself drifting to the smallest room in the monastery, a stone library that smelled of dust and candle wax. Someone, long ago, had left stacks of old volumes and scraps of parchment. I told myself I was looking for a distraction, but the truth was simpler. I needed a reason to keep believing this wasn't all pointless. Late one night, Alina joined me. She set down her flashlight and folded herself onto the cold floor beside me. "You should rest," she said. "I can't," I murmured. She didn't try to argue. Instead, she pulled a cloth-wrapped bundle from her coat. "I was going to wait," she said, "but maybe you're ready to see this now." I unwrapped the bundle with careful hands. Inside were brittle pages covered in tiny script. Some were written in Latin, others in Greek, still others in symbols I didn't recognize. "What is this?" I whispered. "Proof," she said softly. I looked up. "Proof of what?" "That the simulation didn't begin with us," she said. "That the custodians didn't invent it. They inherited it." I turned the first page over. A date had been inked along the margin, 1657. Below it, in careful Latin, was a phrase that made my skin prickle. The architects who shaped the sky leaned closer, her voice low. "I started collecting these when I left the custodians," she said. "Fragments of older traditions, Babylonian, Vedic, Hermetic. Every culture has a version of the same story. A group of beings who wrote the laws of reality, who could erase and rewrite existence." I felt a tightness in my chest. "Why haven't we've seen this before?" I asked. "Because the custodians control the narrative," she said. "When they can't bury a story, they call it myth, legend, religion. But if you look closely, the patterns are the same." I picked up another scrap. A Sumerian tablet, the cuneiform faded, but still legible. Alina had marked one section in red ink, the sky scribes whose words bind the world. I thought of the patch logs we'd recovered, commands embedded in the simulation's fabric, altering timelines as if they were lines of text. "It's all the Same language, I whispered. Alina nodded. Axel suspected this. That's why he started mapping the patch timelines against historical events. He was trying to find when the first edits happened. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded map. When she spread it on the floor, I saw hundreds of tiny pins, each marking a place and date. He believed the earliest patches corresponded to mythic resets, she said. The flood myths, the stories of the world ending and beginning again. I traced one pin with my finger. Egypt, 2345 BCE. And you think the architects were real, I said. I think they were the first custodians, she said quietly. Or something worse. I sat back, letting it sink in. My mind felt stretched thin, as if some small part of me still wanted to pretend this was just a puzzle I could solve. But the more I looked at those papers, the more I understood. This wasn't a conspiracy built in the last century. It was something older than any institution I'd ever studied. A hidden lineage of people who believed they had the right to shape reality itself. What were they trying to do? I asked Elena. Gaze was steady. Preserve stability, she said. Just like the custodians now. If the simulation failed, too many anomalies stacked up, it would collapse. I felt cold. So maybe they're right, I said. Maybe we shouldn't be tampering with this. Alina was quiet for a long moment. I've thought about that, she admitted. But then I remember what Axel said, that if we don't question the architecture, we're no better than prisoners. A sudden noise outside made us both tense. The creak of a door somewhere deeper in the monastery. I stood, heart thudding. Karim's voice called down the hall. Myra, you need to see this. Alina and I exchanged a look, then hurried to the main chamber. Karim sat at the table, the reader glowing beside him. He looked up as we entered, his face pale with exhaustion. I've decrypted part of the backup, he said, and there's something you need to hear. He tapped a key, and a soft voice filled the room. This is Archivist Zulfikar Rowe. If you're hearing this, the custodians failed to contain the seed code. The architect's protocol, known as the creation sequence, was never meant to be found. If you attempt to reconstruct it, you will trigger a verification process. The simulation will test your intent, and if you fail, it will erase everything. The recording ended in a crackle of static. I felt dizzy. The creation sequence, I said softly. It's real. Karim nodded. And the verification, Alina said. What does that mean? I don't know, Karim whispered, but it sounds like some kind of safeguard. Marcus had joined us without my noticing. He looked at the map of mythic resets spread on the table. All this time, he said quietly, we thought the custodians were the ultimate enemy, but they're just one generation of jailers. I couldn't look away from the implant reader. I don't know if we should finish this, I admitted. Alina placed her hand on mine. I don't either, she said. But even as the fear coiled in my gut, I knew we would keep going, because if the architects were real, if they were watching us, then maybe this was the last chance anyone would ever have to pull back the curtain. When we left the monastery, I thought I was ready for what came next, but nothing could have prepared me for the feeling of standing in the shadow of the world's most powerful particle collider, knowing that somewhere beneath our feet lay the data that could unravel reality itself. It was Alina who insisted CERN was our next step. She believed the archive vaults housed the original logs from the first Large Hadron Collider experiment's raw data no one was ever meant to see. If the architect's creation sequence was hidden anywhere, it would be there. Arrived under cover of darkness, the van rumbling to a stop beside a line of unmarked service trucks. From the road, the complex looked like any other high-security research center rows of concrete buildings. Silent security cameras tracking every angle, but I knew the real danger was buried underground. Marcus turned off the engine. He looked back at me, his face tight. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. I almost laughed. "Yes, I do," I whispered. Karim climbed out first, clutching his makeshift neural monitor like a talisman. Alina slipped out behind him, her breath fogging in the cold air. The four of us moved quickly across the dark loading dock. I kept waiting for spotlights to swing toward us or for an alarm to pierce the quiet, but nothing happened. The stillness was worse than any siren. Marcus led us to a side entrance hidden behind a row of compressors. He pulled a stolen key card from his pocket and swiped it through the reader. For one terrible moment, the light stayed red. Then it flicked green. We slipped inside. The hallway smelled like ozone and cold metal. I followed Alina past racks of network switches and steel crates stenciled with serial numbers. At the far end, a set of reinforced doors blocked our path. Karim produced a small plastic card. He turned to me as he slotted it into the panel. "This will trip a maintenance override," he said. "Once it's open, we'll have 20 minutes before the network logs the breach." I nodded. My hands were slick with sweat. The locks released with a low groan. The doors slid open, revealing a wide chamber lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves of tape archives. In the center, a reinforced glass enclosure held several black cases stamped with red seals. Alina let out a slow breath. "That's it," she whispered. I stepped forward, feeling something shift in my chest. For a moment, it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Karim moved to the nearest console and began connecting his neural monitor. Lines of code flickered across the display. Marcus started pulling tapes from the shelves, stacking them into crates. I turned to Alina. "If we find the full creation sequence, we finish what Axel started," she said. I swallowed, trying to quiet the voice in my head that kept asking if we were doing the right thing. Karim looked up, his eyes wide. "Uploading," he said. A progress bar crawled across the monitor. Each second felt longer than the last. Outside, something thundered a deep, echoing boom that made the walls vibrate. "What was that?" I asked. Marcus stepped to the nearest window slit. "Generators," he said. "They're cutting the grid." I felt my stomach drop. Karim's voice was tight. "They're initiating a neural net shutdown," he said. Alina turned. "The custodians," he nodded. "They're trying to isolate leaks. If the grid goes down before this finishes, then it's gone," I whispered. I moved to the console, hands trembling. "How long?" 6 minutes, he said. I tried to focus on the monitor, but my mind kept spinning. If the custodians shut down the neural net, it wouldn't just cut our access. It would trigger global confusion, millions of people losing seconds or minutes of memory. The reset would be the perfect distraction to wipe us away. I closed my eyes and took a steadying breath. "Marcus," I said, "find another way to keep the servers powered." He nodded and vanished into the dark. Karim's fingers flew across the keys. Outside, alarms started wailing. Alina drew her pistol and moved to cover the door. "You're sure we can trust Anne?" she asked without looking at me. I hesitated. "No," I said quietly, but I thought of her face in the naval yard. The way she'd shoved me away to save my life. "She come," I whispered. Karim's voice rose. 3 minutes. I watched the progress bar inch forward. The alarms cut off abruptly. For one heartbeat, I thought maybe we'd won. Then all the lights went out. Total darkness swallowed us. Kareem swore. "Backup battery?" I asked. "No time," he said. Then a low mechanical hum began like an old elevator grinding to life. Turned, searching the shadows. A hatch at the far wall slid open. Anne stepped through, her face streaked with dirt and blood. She held a small device in her free hand. "Auxiliary power unit," she gasped. "Step aside." I moved without thinking. She slapped the unit into the console's emergency port. The screen flickered. Back to life. Uploading resumed. Kareem let out a ragged breath. "You came back," I whispered. Aine didn't look at me. "They had Alina," she said hoarsely. "I got her out." I swallowed hard. "Where is she?" Anne shook her head. "Outside, with my sister. They're waiting in the van." I wanted to hug her, but there wasn't time. Kareem's voice broke the moment. 30 seconds. We held our breath as the last fragments of data poured in. Then, the bar turned green. Upload complete. The screen flashed a single line. Seed logs. Archived. Anne sagged against the wall. I turned to Kareem. "Pull the drive," I said. He yanked the cable free. I took the drive in shaking hands, feeling its weight like a promise. Outside, the alarms restarted. Marcus's voice crackled in my earpiece. "They're coming." Anne straightened. "Go," she said. We sprinted for the hatch, the sound of boots echoing down the main corridor in the loading bay. Alina was waiting with her sister, a small, pale woman who clutched a satchel to her chest. When she saw Anne, her eyes filled with tears. Anne wrapped her arms around her. Just for a second, then we piled into the van as Marcus floored the accelerator. I looked back at the dark mouth of the collider complex. Somewhere in its depths, the simulation had just felt us pry up another corner of its mask, and this time we'd stolen something it couldn't erase. But as dawn crept over the hills, I couldn't shake the feeling that the simulation was already shifting around us like it was trying to find a way to close the wound we'd made. The drive into the Alps felt like a funeral procession. No one spoke. The van rumbled up winding roads carved into sheer rock, our headlights cutting through sheets of blowing snow. Every mile we climbed, the air seemed thinner, like the world itself was holding its breath. I sat in the back seat with the seed logs clutched to my chest. Even after everything we'd been through, I still struggled to believe we'd managed to get them out of CERN. But the relief was already turning into dread. We all knew this was the last step. Alina had traced the simulation's core server, a raise to a subterranean data center hidden beneath the mountains. The custodians called it Site Omega, name that made my skin prickle. According to the stolen blueprints, the facility was protected by electromagnetic shielding, armed patrols, and fail-safe detonations. If we were caught inside, we wouldn't have a chance to surrender. Kareem tried to reassure us as we drove. He said the upload was just a matter of minutes, that if we could get the creation code and the seed logs into the control node, the system would be forced to reveal its architecture. But his voice was thin, brittle. He didn't really believe it would be that simple. None of us did. We parked the van in a stand of pines half a kilometer from the main entrance. A heavy silence settled over us. Marcus checked his rifle one last time. Anne slipped her hand into her sister's and pressed their foreheads together. Alina turned to me, her breath frosting in the cold air. "This is your decision," she said quietly. "If we walk away now, The custodians will keep their secret. The world will stay intact. I looked past her, down the slope where the mountain fell away into darkness. Intact, I repeated, but not real. She didn't try to change. My mind. We moved out in a line, each of us carrying a piece of the plan. Kareem had the drive. Anne carried a small EMP rig she'd built in the monastery basement. Marcus walked ahead, scanning the tree line for patrols. I stayed close to Alina, my heart thudding so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. At the perimeter fence, we crouched behind a snowdrift. A row of sensor pylons blinked steadily along the wire. 30-second scan intervals, Marcus murmured. When the beam sweeps left, we go. I nodded, barely breathing. The lights shifted. Now, he hissed. We moved in a silent blur, slipping under the fence and into the cover of a retaining wall. My legs were shaking so hard I nearly stumbled beyond. The wall floodlights lit a concrete courtyard. A single armored transport idled by the loading dock. Steam billowing from its exhaust. Kareem tapped my shoulder. There, he whispered, pointing to a reinforced service door. I nodded and followed him across the open ground. Every step felt like it might be my last. At the door, Anne crouched beside the keypad, her gloved fingers moving fast. Encrypted, she murmured, but not unbreakable. A soft click. The lock disengaged. We slipped inside. The air smelled of cold metal and something chemical I couldn't name. The hallway beyond was lit by a single strip of red. Emergency lighting. Kareem pulled a folded printout from his Kota map of the facility. 2 levels down, he said. Server core is beneath the primary cooling grid. I pressed my palm against the wall to steady myself. Lead the way, we moved in single file. Every turn felt tighter, every door heavier. My breath kept catching in my throat. Halfway down the main corridor, a voice crackled over the intercom. Unauthorized access detected. All units to Section 3. Anne cursed under her breath. Faster, she hissed. We broke into a run, boots thudding. On polished concrete, around the next corner. 2 custodian soldiers in black combat suits swung their weapons up. Marcus didn't hesitate. He fired twice, each shot impossibly loud in the confined space. One of the soldiers dropped. The other staggered, screaming. Go, he roared. Kareem and I sprinted for the stairwell. I heard more shots behind us, but didn't dare look back. Down 2 flights, into a hallway lined with humming conduits. The air was warmer here, vibrating with hidden power. The control node door stood at the far end, sealed with a biometric scanner. Kareem turned to me, panting. You have to help me. He pressed my hand to the panel beside his. A dull chime, access. Granted, the lock released with a shudder. Inside, rows of glass cabinets held server racks, glowing with pale blue light. At the center, a single console pulsed with a steady heartbeat. Kareem moved to it, fingers dancing across the keys. Initializing upload, he gasped. I hovered by the doorway, my eyes flicking between him and the hall. Anne burst through the door a moment later, blood on her sleeve. They're coming, she said. How long? I asked Kareem. 3 minutes. A tremor ran through the floor. Then Marcus's voice crackled over the comm. They brought in reinforcements, RPG. Anne didn't hesitate. She dropped her pack and pulled out the EMP rig. I'll collapse the power grid, she said. No, I said. You won't get clear. She met my eyes, calm. Someone has to buy you time. Before I could argue, she pressed something small and cold into my palm. A silver locket. Give this to my sister, she whispered. I shook my head, a nay, but she was already turning away, pressing the rig into the junction box beside. The door, Kareem's voice broke over the cum. Upload at 70%. The lights flickered. A low alarm started pulsing overhead. Anae looked back at me one last time. Finish it, she said. Then she slipped out into the hall, sealing the door behind her. I pressed my fist to my mouth. My legs nearly gave out. Kareem didn't look up. 80%, he said hoarsely. I closed my eyes. I thought of the first night I'd opened Axel's file. How simple it had seemed to just find the truth. The console chimed. 90%. A roar shook the walls and explosions somewhere above us. Sparks rained down from the ceiling. Kareem's voice cracked. Almost there. I moved to the console beside him, pressing my hand to the glass. The lights turned green. Upload complete. I felt a strange stillness descend. Kareem leaned back, his face grey. You did it, he whispered. I swallowed hard. No, I said softly. We did. The alarms went silent all at once. For a heartbeat, it was like the facility itself was holding its breath. Then the console flickered, displaying a single line. Creation code activated. Kareem looked at me, eyes wide. You understand what this means, he said. I nodded. It means the architects will come. I whispered. I didn't know if I was ready, but as the lights dimmed and the control node began to hum, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I thought the worst was over when we finished the upload, that the custodians would cut their losses, or that the simulation itself would simply shudder and continue on, too vast to notice one small breach. But as I stood beside Kareem in the humming dark, I felt the air grow dense in a way I can't quite explain. It was like the walls themselves were watching. Somewhere far above us, I heard the muffled crack of detonations. Maybe Anace's EM rig had finally collapsed the facility's power grid, or maybe the custodians were destroying evidence. It didn't matter. The console in front of us was still alive, the screen filled with lines of green text crawling too fast to read. Kareem wiped sweat from his forehead. His eyes looked hollow. There's something else in here, he whispered. I didn't answer right away. My heartbeat was so loud I felt it in my ears. What do you mean? He pointed to a secondary process running in the corner of the display. A single word blinked in pale letters. Archive. I swallowed. Can you open it? He hesitated, then nodded. If we don't now, we may never get another chance. I didn't have the strength to argue. Kareem tapped in a command. The screen went black for a moment, then flickered back with a new interface, simpler, older. A grid of file names appeared, labeled in the same code Axel had once scrawled in. The margins of his journals. Protosouls, Kareem breathed. He was right. The word made my skin crawl. I stepped closer, reading the headers over his shoulder. Iterative consciousness snapshot 0043. Residual memory structure 01 to 1. Simulated. Self-image 0009. Each entry had a date. Some went back centuries. These are people, I whispered. Kareem didn't look away from the screen, or fragments of them. Copies the custodians archived after timeline resets. He clicked one. A voice crackled from the speakers thin and distant, like a broadcast from another world. If anyone can hear me, please. I don't want to be forgotten. I pressed my hand to my mouth. The voice belonged to a man who had been dead for centuries. Or maybe he'd never lived in the first place. Karim's fingers hovered over the console. "They're still in here," he murmured, running in suspended memory. A silence settled over us, heavy as a tomb. I thought of every myth I'd ever studied, the legends about lost souls trapped between worlds, calling out for release. And I realized those stories were never about ghosts. They were about this. "What happens if we download them?" I asked. Karim turned to me, his eyes searching. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe nothing, maybe everything." He didn't have to say it out loud. If the simulation was held together by these fragments, freeing them could break it, but leaving them here felt worse. He opened another entry. A child's voice filled the room, soft and uncertain. "Is it over? Can I go home now?" I felt something inside me crack. "We can't leave them," I said. Karim swallowed. "If we start the transfer, it could destabilize the core." "I don't care," I whispered. He searched my face, then nodded once. "Help me," he said. We began tagging each record for extraction. My hands shook so badly I kept fumbling the keys. Karim worked in silence, his expression unreadable. When we reached the last entry, I hesitated. It was labeled only seed prototype, origin. I clicked. It opened. A line of text appeared. Architect Echo.Karim looked at me, voice low. "This could be their own consciousness backup," he said. "The first architect." I felt a wave of nausea. "If we pull it out, we might trigger a verification process," he finished. I thought of the archivist's recording, the warning about the test. I didn't know if I believed in any cosmic judgment, but I did believe the simulation had rules. And this felt like the moment we were about to break them. "We finish it," I said. Karim nodded. His hand hovered over the final command. I closed my eyes. "Do it." He pressed the key. The console screen went white. For a moment, I thought we'd killed the system. Then a low tone began to hum through the servers, a single note that vibrated in my chest. I opened my eyes. Text scrolled across the white field. "Extraction initiated. Please prepare target vessel." Karim turned, his face pale. "We need a host," he said. I felt my throat close. "We can't upload them into me," I whispered. "No," he said. "But if we bridge the neural array, we can stage them in temporary storage." He gestured to the portable neural reservoir, an egg-shaped device the size of a backpack. I grabbed it, fumbling with the clasps. "Will it hold them all?" I asked. He met my gaze. "I don't know," he said. I didn't let myself hesitate. I clipped the reservoir into the console port. The tone deepened. I felt the air shiver, like a storm about to break. Karim gripped my shoulder. "Whatever happens," I nodded. "I know." Light bloomed across the server hall. For a single, impossible moment, the walls seemed to vanish. I saw layers of code drifting through space, endless grids of shimmering symbols. Faces flickered in the light, thousands of them, all staring. "Back, we remember." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Will you free us?" I swallowed. My heart felt too big for my chest. "Yes," I whispered. A soft chime. Transfer complete. The light died. I staggered back. Gasping, Karim caught me, his own breath ragged. "It worked," he said. I looked down at the neural reservoir. Tiny indicator lights pulsed along its surface edge. One, a consciousness waiting to wake. Outside, I heard shouting. The custodians were coming. Karim pressed the reservoir into my hands. "Go," he said. I shook my head. Not without you. He met my eyes. They can't catch you, he said. If they do, this was for nothing. I wanted to argue, but I saw the truth in his face. I turned and ran. The hallway shook with distant impacts. As I reached the exit hatch, I looked back one last time. Kareem stood beside the console, the white light already building again. I slipped out into the snow, clutching the reservoir to my chest. In the distance, the mountains pulsed with flickering. Code-like reality itself was bleeding through. I didn't know how much time we had left, but I knew I was done running. I didn't sleep the night after we left the Alps. No one did. The van became a moving refuge, rattling down empty roads as if motion itself could keep us alive. Outside, dawn crept across the snowfields in thin blue light. It felt like a world, suspended between realities, waiting to decide which story to believe. Alina sat behind me, arms folded tight, watching the neural reservoir on my lap. Its indicator lights blinked in slow patterns, each a memory I had agreed to protect. Anne was up front beside Marcus, her hands twisting in her coat. She hadn't spoken much since we pulled her from the collapsing data center. When Marcus finally pulled the van off the road, we were somewhere in northern Italy, hidden beneath an abandoned rail bridge. I climbed out into the cold air and pressed my hands to the concrete pillar, trying to slow my thoughts. I kept seeing Kareem's face as the vault filled with light, how steady he'd been, even when he knew he wouldn't walk out. And I thought of all the voices I'd heard in the archive, asking the same question. Will you free us? And I stepped out beside me. She didn't look up. He knew what he was doing, she said quietly. I nodded. That doesn't make it easier. No. She agreed. The reservoir pulsed between us like a heartbeat. Later, in the van, Elena spread out the last decrypted logs from CERN. Kareem had hidden them in the reservoir's buffer, a final act of faith. She pointed to a set of entries marked Exit Protocol, Verification Sequence. It's all here, she whispered. The 9 cognitive phases. I read the list twice, feeling my throat tighten. Wonder, acceptance, curiosity. Goich phase was linked to a neural signature, a pattern the simulation used to validate a user's intent. The logs suggested that if enough people synchronized these states, the simulation would either dissolve, reveal itself completely. Anne traced her finger down the list. It's not just code, she murmured. It's a test. Alina looked up. We triggered this. There's no going back. I sat very still. If we do nothing, I said, the custodians win. No one argued. But in that quiet, I felt a wave of fear so strong it nearly drowned me. What if we were wrong? What if this was just another trick, one last layer of control to make us believe we were free? I thought of Karim's last words. Whatever happens, I closed my eyes. Don't stop. I took a slow breath. Let's prepare the broadcast, I said. Anne swallowed. How do we reach everyone? We don't, Marcus said. But we don't have to. The custodian's neural net covers most of the planet. If we inject the signal through their own channels, it will propagate globally, Alina finished. She met my gaze. It could cause panic. Or clarity, I said. We worked through the night. Anne built the transmission rig, a mess of cables and antennas wired into an old satellite uplink. Alina encoded the neural patterns. Marcus watched the perimeter, rifle never leaving his hands. I kept my eyes on the reservoir. As dawn crept into the van again, Anne handed me a headset. When you're ready, she said. I looked around at the people who had risked everything to get here. Alina, Marcus, Anne, and Karim, whose sacrifice had made this possible. I put on the headset. "Do it," I said. Anne keyed the transmitter. A low hum filled the cabin as the broadcast initiated. I felt it first as a subtle pressure behind my eyes, like a memory trying to surface. My heartbeat slowed, synced to the pulse of the reservoir. Text flickered across the main monitor phase. One wonder, images filled my mind in possible vistas, landscapes that stretched beyond physics. I felt the awe of a child staring at the stars. Phase 2, acceptance. My fear melted into something quieter. I accepted that everything I knew might be an illusion. Phase 3, curiosity. I leaned into the questions, no longer afraid of them. Why are we here? Who made us? What happens if we wake up? Phase 4, empathy. Faces rose around Mikarim's, Anis's sister, the protosouls I'd promised to free. My chest ached with the weight of their stories. Phase 5, doubt. The images faltered. I felt the familiar panic. What if this destroys everything? Elena's hand found mine. Her touch steadied me. Phase 6, transcendence. The fear dissolved. For a moment, I felt myself expand beyond the body, beyond the simulation. Phase 7, unity. I sensed others joining me, millions, maybe more. People across the world receiving the same broadcast. We were linked by the same fragile hope. Phase 8, courage. I drew in a slow breath. This was the choice Karim had trusted me to make. I thought of Axel's last message, "Don't trust reality." I finally understood what he meant. It wasn't a warning. It was permission. Phase 9, letting go. I exhaled. The world dissolved. For a breathless instant, I saw everything. Layers of code drifting in a dark ocean. The architects, faceless and infinite, watching from the horizon. The custodians' networks, flickering like candle flames. Then the darkness lifted. The monitor in front of me displayed a single prompt: exit or remain. My vision blurred. "What does it mean?" Anne whispered. I felt a strange peace. "It means we choose," I said outside. The sky shifted colors, pulsing through the spectrum as if reality itself was breathing. I looked at my team, each of them waiting. Marcus's hand rested on my shoulder. "Whatever you decide," he said, "we'll stand with you." I turned back to the prompt: exit or remain. I thought of the voices in the archive, please. I don't want to be forgotten. I thought of Karim, of Axel. I closed my eyes. We deserve to know. I reached for the console. "Remain," I whispered. The sky brightened all at once. The code melted into clarity, revealing the scaffolding beneath our world. And, for the first time, we were no longer prisoners, we were witnesses. The moment I chose to remain, the world changed. It was subtle, at first, soft flicker around the edges of my vision, like a film reel slipping out of alignment. Then the air thickened. Every sound stretched, slow and syrupy. I felt a pressure in my chest, as if the simulation was trying to measure my worth in the space of a single heartbeat. Console in front of me blinked out. A pale glow rose from the floor, spreading until it filled the room in a dull, white haze. For a moment, I couldn't see Anne or Marcus or Alina. I was alone. Then a voice spoke. It wasn't a voice in any normal sense. It moved through me, each syllable echoing in my bones. "You have chosen awareness over dissolution." I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. We are the architects. You stand before the threshold. I wanted to ask why they had hidden themselves for so long, why they had created a universe only to lock it behind layers of illusion. But all I could manage was a whisper. Why me? Because you dared to look. The fog thinned. Shapes resolved in the glow-pale figures, without faces or edges, like sketches half-finished. They regarded me with something that wasn't exactly curiosity or contempt. It felt older than either. One stepped forward. Its form shifted with each movement, as if it were being re-rendered every second. You are the first to complete the sequence without coercion. The words felt final. I closed my eyes, trying to center myself. I thought of Kareem, Anne, Axel, all. The people who had given everything so I could stand here. When I opened my eyes, the figure hadn't moved. What happens now? I asked. You must decide. The glow brightened, filling the room until I could see nothing else. Sever the simulation and risk annihilation, or rewrite the parameters and grant transparency. My heart beat so hard I felt it in my palms. Sever it. I whispered, what does that mean? The simulation ends. All consciousness returns to base reality. Base reality exists. I felt dizzy and rewriting it. You will preserve existence, but all hidden layers will be revealed. Every human will know this world was an artifact. I thought of the billions of people living their lives, believing in the solidity of everything around them. I thought of the children, the ones who had never asked to be born in a place built to test them. A part of me wanted to tear it all down, to refuse the idea that any of this was real if it was also a prison. But another part, quieter and maybe wiser, wondered if destroying the simulation was just another way to abandon everyone inside it. The figure stepped closer. You have seen the code. You have heard the echoes. What will you do? I tried to steady my breathing. Somewhere beyond the light, I sensed movement, footsteps, a hand on my shoulder. Anace's voice broke through. Myra, whatever you choose, remember why we came this far. Her presence grounded me. I turned my head, and the fog parted enough to see her silhouette beside me. Marcus stood just beyond her, his posture rigid but his face calm. Alina rested her hand on the console, watching me. We were all here together. Is this real? I asked the architects. Or is this another layer? It is as real as you are. I let out a shaky laugh. That's not an answer. There are no final answers, only choices. A flicker of irritation broke through my fear. Then let me ask you something, I said, my voice louder now. If you built this to cultivate intelligence, if this was all a test, what happens when we see through it? The figure was silent. That is your story to write. I looked back at my team. Their eyes were on me. No one spoke. No one needed to. I thought about Anice's sister, the children in the Protosoul archives, the billions who would never understand how close they'd come to erasure. I thought of Kareem in the dark server room, refusing to look away. I turned, back to the architects. I won't destroy it, I said. The glow shifted, rippling across the floor. You choose to rewrite. Yes, I whispered. State your intention. My mouth felt dry. My heart was steady now. We keep this world intact, I said. But everyone deserves to know the truth. No more hidden patches. No more memory wipes. No more illusions. Silence. Then the glow pulsed, acknowledged. Acknowledged, I felt something lift a weight I hadn't realized. I was carrying The room darkened, returning to the familiar shape of the control node. The console sparked back to life, displaying lines of text in calm white letters. Rewrite protocol complete. Transparency engaged. I turned. My team stood exactly as they had been, as if no time had passed. Anne took a single step toward me. "You did it?" she whispered. "No," I said, voice raw. "We did." Outside, the ground shook just once, like the world exhaling. We climbed out of the facility into a dawn that looked the same but felt different. The sky had a clarity I'd never noticed, as if someone had wiped a film from my eyes. In the distance, I saw something I still don't know how to describe. A shimmer in the air like the code itself was visible in threads and lattice. We stood together, watching it drift. Marcus broke the silence first. "What now?" I looked down at my hands, still trembling. "Now we tell them," I said. Anne nodded. "They won't all believe you." "They don't have to," I said. "They'll see it for themselves." Behind us, the control node hummed one last time, then went dark. A message scrolled across the display. "Welcome home." I felt something warm slide down my cheek. I wiped it away, embarrassed by the tears. Alina rested her hand on my shoulder. "Are you ready to be the villain in half the world's stories?" she asked softly. I thought about it, about the fear, the anger, the grief that would follow when people realized the truth. "Yes," I said, because the alternative, living in a lie forever, was worse. We started down the slope together, the morning bright on our faces, at the edge of the valley. I stopped and turned back one last time. I half expected the facility to vanish, or for the mountains to dissolve into wireframe scaffolds, but they didn't. They stayed solid, as real as they'd ever been. And maybe that was enough. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to get more.